Here at Common Ground, we teach that at the core of all the religions and the traditions, it's all the same, right? The love, the kindness, and the compassion. There's a piece that I'm going to share with you. It's actually edited a little bit. But somebody asked this organization called Inspiration Ministries, they were asked, what do you believe about Jesus? And this is what how they responded to that. We believe that God so loved all his creations that he came down in one part of the world and revealed himself as a man and a way shower and called himself Jesus. That he again came down in another part of the world and revealed himself as a man and a way shower to people and called himself Muhammad. That he once again came down in another part of the world and revealed himself as a man and a way shower to people and called himself Buddha. We believe that each teacher had a divine mission and destiny, that each fulfilled the mission and destiny perfectly according to God's purpose for their life. For their life and for the time and for the area and right. And I love that piece because that's exactly what we teach here. And in a nutshell, Jesus' teaching was what? Love God, love yourself, love others. He taught a universal love. The life and the death of Jesus and the teachings that have been attributed to him over the years have influenced the course of human history more than any other person who has ever lived on this planet. That's quite a legacy, don't you think? And wouldn't you agree that we all know who that is? And we all know that that basic core teaching was love, was respect. The core of the teaching, the basis, was the nature of God and man, of life, of the world, and of the relationship that exists between those things. He explained what the nature of God is, what our own nature is. He told us about the meaning of life and death, why we make mistakes, why we give in to temptation, why we become sick or impoverished, and most importantly, how we overcome those things and bring that health and happiness and prosperity into our life. I think it's really important to note here that Jesus did not teach theology. His entire teachings were of a spiritual nature. The doctrines and the theologies of the churches have come from human interpretations of the Bible and interpretations of his teaching, which is why so many of those interpretations differ and they vary. The people that were involved in writing those may have been seeking that pure intellectual or three-dimensional explanation of life versus looking at the spiritual aspects of what Jesus actually taught. The Gnostic Gospels of Jesus, which came out of the Nag Hammadi library back in 1945, portrays Jesus as the ultimate teacher of wisdom with that message of enlightenment and liberation. Really no different than the New Testament, right? In the Gnostic Gospels, there's a book called The Round Dance of the Cross. And in this book, Jesus reveals the secret to being free from suffering. And what is really interesting in that piece is it is reflective and the same teaching as Buddha. Jesus taught that a true understanding of suffering leads to a liberation of suffering, which of course is exactly a Buddhist teaching. Now, you may have heard or understood the Gnostic Gospels to be metaphysical in nature. And sometimes that word metaphysical, people go, right? What is that? Well, the word metaphysical is nothing to be afraid of. It dates back to Aristotle, if you can imagine. And he simply was describing a power that operated beyond the physical senses. So it literally means above or beyond the physical. That's all. It's not really a scary word. But when I say that sometimes to people not in this space necessarily, they just go, ah, right? And kind of panic. They don't know what that is. So as I read the Bible and interpret the Bible and Jesus' teachings, I like to do so from a metaphysical perspective, not a literal interpretation. I'm looking for that spiritual meaning behind what he's teaching or what he's saying, so I can use that information on my own journey, so I can relate it to my life. So, with that said, I understand heaven and hell not to be places, not to be locations. I understand them to be conditions. Conditions that we are creating for ourselves here while we're on this planet. Heaven is an expanding awareness of our divine potential, which we all have, our Christ-like nature, that which lies within us. We are in heaven when we're in the flow of and feeling that connection with God's source, life, with the presence and the power and the wisdom and the love. That's heaven. And I know you can attest to that because you've all felt it. The Greek word for heaven literally means expansion. So as you think about that, in all of Jesus' parables, when he talked about the kingdom of heaven, he used examples of expansion. He raised bread, flourishing mustard seeds. Jesus never referred to heaven as a place, as a location out there. He specifically, very specifically, referred to heaven as being within. By the same token, hell is not a place that we go to be punished for our sins. Instead, hell is that pain that we bring upon ourselves when we're blind to the good in all things. And the word hell comes from the Greek word Hades, and that means to be blind. And we suffer when we are blind to God's gifts, to life's beautiful potential for us. And you think about this, and maybe you've done this yourself. People who say they went through hell. Usually later, we will recognize that that was a time of spiritual growth in our lives. Because being brought face to face with our sins does indeed set us free. Now, I say sins because we're on the topic of sin. I want to clarify that too. I want to talk about that word. Sin was simply a term used in archery back in the day, which meant to miss the mark. A simple mistake, an error in judgment. Jesus brought forth a new principle of sin in the New Testament, and he explained that it was a condition of a man's heart. In other words, his mind. Sin being a state of mind, a belief that error is real. Sin is the belief that we are punished for our mistakes rather than by our mistakes. And those two things are very, very different. Now, that doesn't mean that we can do whatever we want, anytime we want, without consequences. Nor does the fact that we're punished for our mistakes mean that there's an evil power in the universe. It does mean there's an immutable law of cause and effect running through all things. Now, the only real sin that we can commit, and I'll bet you can guess this, is the belief that we are separate from God. And that's true because that is what leads us to negative or destructive or inappropriate behavior. And of course, we're never separate from our source, not in reality. only in thought. Jesus taught love for and faith in God. And as we know, with faith, life is a whole lot easier and a lot less stressful. The love of God was so essential to the teachings of Jesus, and as you know, it's one of the 2 great commandments, right? That most of us are familiar with. That we shall love the Lord our God with all of our heart, all of our mind, and all of our soul. And that we should love our neighbor as ourselves. I think those are 2 very reasonable ideas. Jesus taught a whole lot in his very short lifetime. And what he left this world with was a set of basic ideals that any person can live by. Faith in God, universal love, non-judgment of others. That was the key legacy that he left, I believe, for future generations, whether it's interpreted in a religious or historical or social perspective. You don't have to be a believer or a Christian to understand or even accept the teachings that he shared with us. He just simply laid down a set of guidelines for living, for how to treat other people, particularly the needy and the oppressed. Most of what Jesus taught was what we teach, embracing humanity, the humanity of others as well as ourselves, and expressing divinity, being that divine spark in the world, and recognizing that divinity in all others. And I think it's really important, you know, most of you probably heard yesterday we had another terrible, terrible tragedy, this time a little closer to home here in north of San Diego. And I think it's so important to remember right now at this time that everyone is equal in the eyes of God. And he taught that. That's a principle and an idea that Jesus taught. And if it wasn't clear enough by his words, it was certainly clear enough by his deeds, by his actions. He was very clear that every person on this planet, no matter what, no matter whatever, what if you can come up with, that person always has direct access to an all-loving, all-powerful God. And that one life is just as important as another in the heart of God. And I know no one in this room would deny that to be the truth. Through an intense connection with and the faith in the way the universe works, those who believe and work with that truth will have a much deeper understanding of the meaning of life. Core in Jesus' teachings was that universal love, the need to be open and to be accepting of all people. I'm going to say that 45 times, of all people. Because I think that's so important, and we're not seeing enough of that right now in our world. It's up to us, right? It starts here. According to Jesus, every person is a child of God. And because of this, it's essential to treat everyone equally and with care and with love and with respect. Even 2,000 years ago, right? Jesus was telling us that in the eyes of God that we're all connected, that we're all one. Now, somewhere along the line, that teaching got pushed to the side or ignored or something. And that truly is core of what he taught. And if everyone treated everyone else with the respect as he taught, the world we live in would be a much more peaceful place, much more harmonious. It's a nice thought. And I do believe it was the idea of this perfect peacefulness that Jesus wanted to get across. I believe that. While we may not be able to get to that perfect place right now, at this time, it does give the human race hope, doesn't it? It gives us something to strive toward. What would happen if those ideals were attained? Peace on the entire earth with people respecting each other. What a beautiful sight that could be. And could it actually happen? I don't know. I believe so. And God willing, it will. Jesus also taught the concept of being non-judgmental, which really goes to that same idea, right? We're hurting each other because we're different. I mean, how disheartened would Jesus be to see the judgment that goes on this planet today? And for me, that prompts this question. If we're all children of the one God and so intimately connected, which I know we are, why on earth do we treat each other with such disregard? What is the purpose? In truth, in reality, we are so connected, how can we not see that we are hurting ourselves by doing this? Not to mention hurting our planet, our world at large. Just because a state of complete interpersonal respect doesn't exist right now, or we don't see it right now, doesn't mean it never will. There's always hope. There's always tomorrow. And it is up to each one of us who would like to experience that change to, guess what? To become that change. That's our responsibility. Treating others with respect is not only, or not just, a nice thing to do. It's a completely a logical act if we want to see that particular change in this world. Starts here, always up to us. Imagine a time and a place where war is something that is learned about in history books. How awesome would that be? Imagine a time when the word fight can't be found in the dictionary. It's difficult to see that time and that place today because our world has become a little complicated. I'll give you that. However, Jesus taught that if one person strives to make a difference, then they will. Jesus was one man, and look what he was able to accomplish in his lifetime, in that short amount of time that he was here on this planet. His life in and of itself was a big lesson. The lesson is the power of thought. The power of doing, of action. Something that we all possess. Something we can all do. We all have that God-given ability. Think about the positive impact that Jesus had on this world. One man, and his mind changed the face of the earth. Not only did he teach, and this is one of my favorite parts, not only did he teach that we are capable of doing what he did, he said we could do even greater things. How awesome is that? How different the world would be if we all took that to heart. And if we all really lived that. We have that responsibility. This is home. It's all we got. Jesus was a man from Nazareth, the son of Mary, a teacher, a human and historical being. And as he became aware of his divine nature and his connection to God, he shared what he knew. He lived what he knew. And he was called the Christ, the Anointed One. Someone to show us the way, to show us our own potential as humans when we are fully aligned with our source. We all want more life, more happiness, more good, said Charles Fillmore. And we can have everything we want if we comply with the divine law as Jesus did. So I ask you, and I'd like you to think about during the week, what greater works are you going to accomplish? Thank you so much for being here while I shared this truth as I understand it.